Motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Phil Twyford.
Mr Speaker, Labor is voting for the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. It's better than nothing, and with such an important issue as making New Zealand homes warm and dry, which I will argue is probably one of the biggest public health challenges that this country faces. We welcome this bill coming to the House. It is a small incremental initiative, but sadly it falls a long way short of the kinds of policies that this government would be advocating if it was serious about dealing with this problem. The bill has four big defects that I will speak about in more detail. The first is that it contains or does not propose any standard for heating of rental properties. It has an excessively long 4-year phase-in period for landlords. There is no provision, thirdly, for setting standards for mould or ventilation. And finally, there's a massive loophole proposed with this bill in the proposed regulations that will flow from this bill that will allow houses that are currently insulated with the 1978 standard for insulation to retain that standard, and they will not be required under this bill as it's currently drafted to meet the 2008, the current Building Act standards for insulation. So four big weaknesses that I will return to. So this issue is incredibly important, and I think in recent years New Zealanders have come to the view that it's high time that we fixed up our rental housing. Around half the number of children who are growing up below the poverty line in New Zealand are living in private rental housing that is currently more or less unregulated, and many of them are living in substandard, cold, damp and mouldy housing that is a threat to their health. In this country, we hospitalise about 40,000 children every year from poverty-related diseases: asthma, gastroenteritis, bronchiolitis. It's a blood-curdling list of poverty-related diseases that we simply shouldn't have in significant numbers in this country, but we do. And the problem is the toxic cocktail of poverty, overcrowding, and poor quality, cold, damp houses. The polls show, public opinion tells us that New Zealanders want this problem fixed. People believe that every child growing up in this country deserves to grow up in a warm, dry home. And the reason, sir, one of the reasons is that very credible public health research done in this country shows that for every dollar you invest in the retrofitting of houses through insulation and heating can save up to $5 in public health expenditure. It's a no-brainer. We should be doing it. The public want to see it done. But this bill that Nick Smith has brought to the House is a classic Nick Smith special. It is yet another grudging half measure by a minister that has been dragged kicking and screaming by public opinion to do something about a problem, but insists yet again on doing the bare minimum to try to convey the impression that the government is actually doing something about the problem. I want to quote Professor Philippa Howden-Chapman of Otago University's Wellington campus, who won the Prime Minister's Science Prize earlier this year for the work that she and her colleagues had done documenting the public health effects of poor quality housing. She writes, "Houses get damp and cold and mouldy, but it also damages the people living in them, particularly babies, children and older people. It damages their lungs. If they have heart problems, it's harder for their circulatory system to work. And so people who live in cold houses, it's likely to aggravate their heart conditions. But for children, we get this terrible battery of respiratory infections and close contact infections because people have to crowd together in one room. It's pretty shocking in a country that is as wealthy as we are that we can't make our houses warm enough for people to keep healthy in." That, sir, is a very important part of the New Zealand housing story. And if the National Party members opposite had voted for my Healthy Homes Bill in April this year, that would have regulated minimum standards for both heating and insulation, then we wouldn't be here wasting time with this excuse, this half measure of a bill. But the good news, sir, is that this House will get the chance to debate and vote on Andrew Little's Healthy Homes Guarantee that will achieve the same effect. It will legislate both for modern, efficient, fixed heating sources in a house and for insulation standards, because we need homes that are both warm and dry. And the huge gap in Nick Smith's bill today, sir, is that it only imposes insulation standards. It doesn't impose heating standards. And under Nick Smith's bill, we will see landlords around the country implementing an insulation standard. They will insulate cold, damp homes. They will still be cold, damp homes. And children will still be getting sick because this minister, Nick Smith, is pandering to slum landlords, pandering to the bottom of the market, because he won't do the decent thing and legislate standards for both heating and insulation. Sir, one of the big defects that I mentioned in this bill is that in Nick Smith's falling over himself not to offend slum landlords, he has designed into this bill a massive loophole that will allow houses that were insulated with the standard that has been required since 1978, which is 70 mils of insulation fibre. 70 mils. This is the thickness of insulation that is required under the 1978 standard. But under this bill, under Nick Smith's legislation, if a house has this level of insulation in the walls and the roof, that's okay. It can continue. But, sir, since 2008, new houses in this country have been required to have this thickness of insulation. It is much, much thicker and more effective. That's why houses that have been insulated with this standard are warmer and drier, because they have this thickness. But Nick Smith, falling over himself to pander to the slum landlords at the bottom of the market, is only going to require them to have this thickness of legislation if they've already got that in the house. Now, that is a massive loophole. And it's a flaw right at the heart of this bill. Nick Smith is happy for them to have this 70 mil insulation, but if houses have been insulated since 2008, they've got this much thicker insulation fibre. Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Smith, but you are letting down hundreds of thousands of New Zealand kids who are growing up and getting sick in cold, damp houses because you aren't willing, sir, to do the right thing and require private landlords to not only are you not required to make them have an efficient heating source, Dr. Smith, not you, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Smith, but you're not willing to require tens of thousands of private landlords whose properties are already insulated with a patently inadequate level of insulation set from the 1978 standards. This bill is not going to require them to upgrade their standards. The question is, sir, why won't Nick Smith do the decent thing? Why does he always bring weak, grudging half measures to this House, no matter what the policy issue is? And in this case, we're talking about cold, damp homes. And the first reason I submit, Mr. Speaker, is that he's pandering to slum landlords. Most of the good landlords in this country, they've already insulated. Most of them already have this. And the Property Investors Federation, they've been publicly advocating for heating standards and legislation. But Nick Smith has brought a bill to this House which falls short of what the Property Investors Federation have been arguing for, because he is pandering to the bottom end of the market and he won't do the decent thing. The good landlords and the professional landlords in this country, they are tired of being undercut by the bottom end of the market who are trying to make a profit at the expense of providing decent, healthy accommodation. Those landlords are willing to put their tenants' lives and the lives of their children at risk because they won't provide decent standards. And the other reason, sir, is that Nick Smith cannot bring himself, he cannot find it in himself to regulate properly, to make markets work better for ordinary Kiwis, because that's not in the DNA of the National Party. They won't do the decent thing. They're pandering to slum landlords, and this bill falls a long way short of what it could do.